My name is Tamika Robinson, and I'm so glad to be with you. I am thoroughly enjoying the conference and, well, symposium, that's the word I should use. So I'm enjoying it, and thank you everybody for joining. In our next section, we are looking at critical pedagogy and innovative approaches. I am happy to introduce our next three presenters, Maria Davou, who is in Greece, Anastasia, Khawaja in Palestine, Jennifer Killam in the US, and Rashida Young, who is also in the US. These presentations are based on the theme of critical pedagogy and innovative approaches. Maria, are you ready?
I'm ready. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Hello from Greece. I hope you can hear me. Is the sound and the screen sharing okay?
Yes,
Right.
everything
Okay.
going right.
Great. So I'm going to talk about deeper learning, which is not what deeper learning is in the States. It's a different thing, and I will explain what it is. It all starts with this fantastic book, which is also a play, the Fahrenheit 451, which talks about a dystopian society where reading books is not allowed, and firefighters actually burn books they find hidden in different places. So I saw this play, I read the book, and I started thinking. So I also want to talk about a little bit about my context in Greece. The TESOL, the ELT market in Greece is very strange. We have this afternoon schools where language teaching operations, we call them, where almost all students go after school and they pay for to learn English. We have 30 recognized certificates at B2 level, CFR B2 level, and the methodology of these 6,000 or more or less LTOs is teaching the test, so teaching to pass an exam. And we have this 100% culture where all schools advertise that they had 100% success, sort of penalizing or stigmatizing failure at an exam that is not necessarily valid or reliable. So this teaching the test methodology leads to choices of practice tests instead of course books. So teachers work with practice tests. A lot of practices, the more tests, the merrier. Teachers end up calculating scores, and it's a race for the bottom, like, who's gonna spot the easiest test so that all students pass. Now, we made some observations in our school. We looked at the literature about the intermediate plateau, the fact that students at B2 level reach a point with very unpredictable language development pace. So some stay at B2, some go on rapidly, but some go back. And this is because the language you need to do simple communicative tasks is there with B2. The other thing we observed is that because so many students go for exams, they had the vocabulary without having the concepts, the notion. So they knew the words, but they didn't really know what the words meant. So it's a reduction of lexis to just sounds of words that are empty of meaning. And thus, students were not engaged and they were not motivated. So learners were reduced to tested robots or testing robots, and teachers were reduced to teaching robots, but even worse, to testing robots. So looking at Martiniuk and the different ways of learning language through automation, drilling, through doing, or through thinking, we thought of ways to explore language development through handling meaning and not just as a repertoire of words that don't mean that much. And we wanted our students to be creative, not just reproductive, to be fully involved with their whole self, their whole personality, to feel that they own their language learning process, their language education process for their own purposes. So we wanted to help our students be in the world in Englishes. There's not just one English, as we know, or in their target languages, but be who they are, not be who the teacher wants them to be. And so we created deeper learning. And what it is, it's that we stopped using course books or any ELT materials after B2 level. We merged C1 and C2. So after B2, you just do deeper learning. And we teach content, not English. So it's very close to CLIL, but we added the element of philosophical inquiry. So the lesson is driven by philosophy. And it's multimodal. So you will have videos, you will have pictures, you will have audios, you will have art, you will have graffiti, you will have text, you will have literature. And I mean, deeper learning is about encouraging students ask questions and explore all possible answers. We teach uncertainty, that there are no definitive answers. The whole idea is to emancipate learners, but not just learners, to emancipate teachers as well, because we break the course book routine. And before teaching the word, we want them to look for the concept, look for the idea, look for the notion that creates a need for the word. So first I need to feel, for example, what it means to have a vision for a better world, and then look for words to describe this better world. The relevant theoretical frameworks are CLIL, bizarreness theory, critical pedagogy, of course, that's why I'm here today. And we feel that deeper learning answers a need, and this is the need of wanting to answer a question, and in fact, not even answer it, to just explore it. So, I mean, this is how it works. Teachers think of a topic they're interested in, and they write 3 questions about it. And we choose the least Googleable one, because, you know, it's very easy to answer questions nowadays. And then we teachers look for possible resources to explore this non-Googleable question. And these resources can be videos, can be works of art, can be poems, can be TED Talks. I mean, anything, that movies that will help us take this journey of exploring the non-Googleable question. Now, deeper learning is a very democratic framework, and the voice of the students is central, and their voice is heard. There's 0 censorship. Students can talk about whatever they want, even if it's unpleasant for the teacher. In our school, we have an open agenda of anti-fascist, anti-racist, LGBTQ friendly and safe space. So, but we welcome students' voices that do not agree with us. And we use the Socratic method by asking questions. We try to help them see where their views come from. So we don't censor ideas. We don't take anything for granted. We say we unlearn and relearn everything. It's not just that the lesson is student-centered, but it's also student-led. The lesson is co-constructed with the learners, and this is done by the absence of course book. So you start with a question, but it's the students who might bring in different questions. So we see ourselves, teachers, as fellow travelers and explorers, and not, you know, the owners of knowledge. We use technology, and we encourage the use of technology in and out of the classroom, but we also encourage the actual reading of actual paper-made books, novels, and revisiting the text, not just the image. So practically, as I said, the teachers find the topics, the questions, the areas of exploration they're interested in. As I said, it's also an emancipating for the teachers framework. Teachers prepare the annual syllabus, which is just, a map that might take a different direction. It's like planning your trip to this destination, but you might find different routes to get there. So we put together the deeper learning schedule, and students choose the topics they like. So for example, you don't follow a topic you don't like. You attend at least 2, maximum 3 deeper learning slots you like based on the topic, on the theme. So they choose up to 3 deeper learning slots. And then throughout the year, they attend their deeper learning sessions, exploring their questions. So how this all ends is that they write a mini research paper. So they learn how to form research questions, how to write an abstract, how to write a bibliography, how to not plagiarize. They present an academic talk at a youth conference we organize. And then we also organize a youth creativity day where they present a creative project based on their exploration of the big question. Assessment happens mainly in a formative way. They have a portfolio, a reflective journal. They do lots of self and peer assessment, but we also have a 10% of summative assessment with mini skills tests, system tests, quizzes, and the research paper in stages that is also assessed summatively. So some deeper learning topics or slots that we've been exploring for the last 5 years that we have adopted this framework: artificial intelligence, visual arts, poetry, fairy tales, human rights, identity, understanding otherness, power relations, and so on. You can see more here, and these are chosen initially by the teachers, and then students choose which of these topics they want to attend throughout the year. The idea is that there are a million possible paths to knowledge and infinite interpretations of the truth. And basically that we start learning in uncharted waters, and we just have to think hard to learn not just English, but the world outside of us and inside of us. So these are some of the questions that we've been exploring in deeper learning. Who am I? Throughout the year, you can see that this is definitely a non-Googleable question. And it's one that will never have an answer, but we explore it through different ways. Is the body necessary for consciousness? If your brain is copied and duplicated exactly as it is, do you think that the robot, which now has your brain, also has your feelings? And we will watch a lot of movies and series, and we will read articles and fiction and about this topic. Can robots feel pain? Do animals feel the same type of pain as humans? Can they be heartbroken, for example? Is the trolley problem a meaningful thought experiment? And if so, how should we program self-driving cars? So students explore these questions throughout the year. How do social media shape who I am? Is the theory of evolution merely a hypothesis? And if not, why is it called a theory? How can I understand your otherness? Why do we dream? And do we dream in words or images? Is falling in love with a robot or a chatbot a possible gender or an expression of sexuality? Am I already a cyborg? Does my smartphone count as an extension of my hand or myself? Do we have free will? And why do we even ask such a question? How accurate is memory? Why did Cinderella have to go back home before midnight? So you can see all the gender stereotypes we can explore through fairy tales. Was the prince really a foot fetishist? This came from students, the prince in Cinderella story. What does happily ever after mean? What is love? And this is an example of how we assess. So this is a whole test. Students had to go to start by going to a web page with a Declaration of Human Rights, and they had to choose 2 that they thought were important. They had to explain in detail what they mean and why they are important for them, and then say what is the most fundamental human right in their opinion. So they interact with the test. There's no right or wrong answer. And then we showed them photos from Moria. This is a refugee camp at the island of Lesbos in Greece. And we asked them to find what basic human rights are violated there, and make a list because they had access to the Declaration of Human Rights. And then they had to answer questions about the living conditions at Moria. They read an article about a fire at the camp there. They had to find who started the fire. Who does the Greek government hold responsible for the fire? So you see, there is a political agenda here, of course, which is open and clear. And what has the right, the police, how the police acted against refugees, and so on. And then the next step in their assessment was to create a video essay where they had to record themselves for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, answering questions. So it's not just integrating the 4 skills, it's integrated everything. It's multimodal, there is transliteracy, you move from the screen to the text, to Kindle, then to comics, you move to different modes of literacy. We practice obviously all skills and systems and 21st century skills. It's very content-based, but above all, it gives voice and choice to the learners. And we use this acronym BYLP, which is for teachers to burn their lesson plan, burn your lesson plan, because the lesson plan is dictating what the next step will be. So I think we need to create lesson plans to know what we want, but then we need to be able at the same time to get rid of them and listen to what the students want to do. Because language teaching and learning, we think, is about exploring who we are, exploring the world, and then finding words and sentences to make our thoughts communicable. So there's a lot of criticality involved, of course, and creativity, and it's all about thought, not thinking, thought. So it's about making connections, and our students learn more than just forming sentences. They learn how to form ideas, their ideas. So these are pictures from the youth conference where they present what they want, but we also teach them the life skill of presenting in front of an audience in a foreign language. And these are photos from the Youth Creativity Day. We had performances, video installations, artwork, poetry, and this is the 3rd youth conference we organized, the 4th youth conference we organized. This is the one for this year, things that never were. And they talked about, topics they chose, femicides, pink tax, fascism and the rise of fascism in Europe, LGBTQ rights. They sang on stage, and they, I'm just going to play. This is it's a Greek version of Canción Sin Miedo, where students went on stage and sang the song all together. And more presentations on different topics by different students. This is an anthology of poems they wrote and we published. And what is the learning outcome? To learn to think in English, to understand the world inside and outside in English, but mainly to understand the world inside and outside. And what about the test? Well, the data from C2 high stakes exams show that their pass results have increased significantly, especially in reading, writing, and speaking. There was no difference, no significant increase of the pass rate or the scores with listening. But really, who cares, to be honest? There are 110 schools in Greece and Cyprus that have adopted deeper learning. And so at this point in Greece and Cyprus, 6,000 students are doing deeper learning. More than 500 teachers are doing deeper learning. We have developed 2 teacher training courses. We also organize one deeper learning teacher conferences every year where deeper learning teachers show ideas that worked. And the 4 youth conference and youth creativity days. We have a research and practice team. And this is our goal, to take part in the dialogue on how language education should change, to revisit the role of ELT materials, to focus on the learner and not on the teacher in teacher training programs, mathematics in other words, to free stakeholders from prescribed learning outcomes, to change the role of the teacher, to have freer teachers who have agency and voice and they can burn their lesson plan, and to, to use this buzzword, this buzz phrase, to think out of the box. We generally think that deeper learning focuses on what matters, and we hope to hack the system. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Maria. That was very, very interesting. And I guess it can work in many other contexts.
Hello, thank you so much, Maria, for your presentation. There were a couple of points there about deeper learning and encouraging teachers and students to dig a little deeper. And I love the fact that it's been adopted by so many different school systems in Greece. So thank you for your presentation. Up next, we have Anastasia Khawaja from Palestine and Jennifer Killam from the United States with social justice in ELT, navigating the educational policy and landscapes. Are you all ready?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. All right, go ahead and share my screen then. Oh, we're on the wrong slide. There we go. That's the right one. So our presentation is titled Social Justice in English Language Teaching, Navigating the Educational Policy Landscapes. I'm Jennifer Killam. I am located in South Florida in the United States. I'm an assistant professor of English for academic purposes at Broward College. And I'm also a doctoral candidate in composition and applied linguistics at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
I am Dr. Anastasia Khawaja. I am currently technically on leave from the University of South Florida, and I've just recently relocated to Ramallah, Palestine. So that's why, wasn't sure how the internet was going to work, but it looks like it's good. And let's see, next slide. Right. Well, I am also involved in TESOL. I'm currently the chair of the Membership Professional Council, and very happy to be here today. Okay, so we have the land acknowledgement statement, and because we technically still both represent Florida, as I still technically represent USF, we're going to go ahead and read the land acknowledgement statement from Florida, because the land acknowledgement statement in Palestine is beyond complex, which is a whole nother webinar in and of itself. So we are joining you from Florida, USA, on the traditional homelands of the Tocobaga, Calusa, and Seminole peoples. Today, Florida is home to the Seminole, Miccosukee, Masugi, and Choctaw groups. Individuals of other Native groups likewise reside here. Given our focus on social justice, we wish to recognize the historical and present impacts on colonization, on violence, and displacement on Indigenous communities. We support Indigenous sovereignty and commit ourselves to continued learning and accountability in support of Indigenous communities, both here and around the world.
We have a brief overview of our presentation today. We're going to touch very, very quickly on what DEI is. There are some conflicting definitions, so it's always helpful to make sure we're on the same page. How do we negotiate pushback against DEI? This is really personal to us coming from Florida, where we're dealing with lots of educational policy that is really restricting some of the work that we can do. And we also want to, as a group, sort of ask the question, how do we work towards DEI and ELT on a larger scale, given this current policy landscape, both in Florida, in the larger US, and certainly in many countries around the world. But before we go very far, we really have to recognize that there is a caveat that not everyone is in a position of privilege at their institutions or in their communities to be vocal in the promotion of social justice. So always we want you to be safe and to protect yourself. We recognize also that many, if not all of us, are just exhausted, and it's been a long road the last couple of years, and it's not quite over since we know the pandemic is not quite over. So that makes doing this kind of work, I think, a lot more challenging, and we really want to recognize that. And there are lots of other things we could recognize that are in the news that that make grappling with the emotions that come up with this really hard. So we want to recognize all of that. And so first we'll slide into what is DEI?
Okay. I don't see the slide yet on my side.
Okay, it's up on my side.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, it's a little bit, the bandwidth can be a bit. All right, so what is DEI? Okay, here we go, I see it. All right, so very, very briefly, because you only have 15 minutes and 5-minute Q&A. Diversity essentially is in all ways in which people differ. Equity, not equality. There are a lot, especially a lot of schools, even universities, they say, well, equity is equality, right? No, not so. And I'm pretty sure we're preaching to the choir in this particular webinar, but I know it's recorded, so we're going to make it clear. Equity is a fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people. One's identity cannot predict the outcome. It really means that everyone needs to start on the same playing field. And as we know, especially in education, depending where we are, that is a challenge. And I also see that here in my own context, in my new context here in Palestine as well. Inclusion is not necessarily putting you into your own silo, but still within a group. Inclusion is literally having a variety of people, having power, a voice, and decision-making authority all at the same time, and everybody having equity and voice. So everything kind of comes together. We usually do a lot more, but we cut out all of that. But I think we're just going to go ahead and wrap up this part with a wonderful quote from George Day, and it is, coming very soon. There it is. All right. Inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space and a better space for everyone. And I think that seems to be the ongoing theme in all the presentations I've seen so far, is creating a new space and advocating for all people. And so we thought that this would be a really good way to move into the next part of our presentation as we talk about pushback in DEI, depending on where you are in your institutions. And as I said before, Jen and I have been in Florida. And we've had a lot of pushback, legal pushback in our state. And I'm sure there's some in Palestine that I need to figure out. So moving on to how to negotiate pushback.
We've got a few questions here. I'm just going to help Anastasia out because I know her bandwidth is a little bit tricky. But would like you to reflect on how you'd characterize the current attitudes towards social justice and ELT in your institution, and what actions, if any, your institution has taken to promote social justice for all students. Moreover, what forms of pushback specifically have you encountered? And I'll just say, in my own context, I've developed some social justice initiatives. I'm in a community college context. I think they're the spaces where some of this work is most needed. And we are in a situation now where I'm in talks with the college lawyer to find out if those initiatives will be allowed to move forward in the next year, whether the funding that those initiatives have received will be considered support that is in violation of the so-called Anti-Woke Act. So that's just to give you a sense of some of the kind of institutional and legal pushback that I'm negotiating even over the summer as we wait for guidance from the Department of Education in the state of Florida. So I'm really interested in knowing what sort of challenges you've faced if you've been doing some of this work. Are you with me? Are you navigating this kind of tangled web of pressures, or has your space been more receptive?
Right, and I'm monitoring the chat as well. So if you don't want to unmute yourselves, please leave your ideas in the chat that we can discuss. As I finally see the question slide over here. All right.
And maybe
Chantal,
go ahead.
Dr. Nero had a really good point in the chat. The space has to be reimagined completely differently. And Dr. Keisha Bryan also said, yes, a new and better space. And so reimagining, deconstructing, all of it, okay. Oh, Gracia, hi, Gracia, I didn't see you in the chat. Definitely inclusion in terms of ensuring the voices are heard and given value, and not just for the purpose of checking the box and showcasing representation, but actually appreciating the value of the diverse voices and taking those contributions into account. I love that. It's absolutely not about just checking the box. Are we diverse? Are we this? It really is about action. It really is about that. So thank you so much for pointing that out. Absolutely. Anybody else? Those are being mindful of the time.
And I think this is a conversation that we could certainly come back to at the end, because I need your help as much as I might be able to proffer some wisdom in terms of how we navigate these structures. I don't think any one of us necessarily has the answer. So I think this is a place where we can all, maybe cross-pollinate ideas, which is why I love this space so much.
I was running through this earlier with my oldest son, and he said, so what are the solutions? I said, well, this is why we're doing this. We don't have solutions. So we all know.
We don't have solutions, which is why we want, to bring this to a bigger audience. But I think the thing for me that I always want to underscore, and it's certainly come up in my context, is that diversity in and of itself is not enough. I think at times our field has sort of relied on the linguistic diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and said, hey, we're already diverse. But that in and of itself is not enough. So I really want to highlight a couple of things that I hope you'll take away and think about. First of all, racial and linguistic justice. April Baker Bell's book is a fabulous and very accessible read if you want an intro to what linguistic justice can look like in an English classroom. Cooper and Ibrahim's work, also political advocacy for learners and their families. This is something that I think that folks in TESOL are really, clued into, but we might also want to reimagine a little bit what that advocacy actually looks like and what it's seeking. And then culturally relevant materials and culturally sustaining pedagogies provide us another entry point into moving beyond this lens of, just diversity. So we've got a couple of quotes here on addressing DEI and ELT, and I'll kind of read them quickly. Social justice-oriented approaches in education refer to standpoints and scholarly traditions that actively address the dynamics of oppression, privilege, and isms, recognizing that society is the product of historically rooted, institutionally sanctioned stratification along socially constructed group lines that include race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ability. And that's coming from Cochran Smith, 2004. And social justice is about distributing resources fairly and treating all students equitably so that they feel safe and secure, physically and psychologically. Sadly, a look at schools across the nation, and we might argue in many other locations around the world, makes it clear that fair distribution of resources and equitable treatment don't always happen. And that's from Alvarez, 2019. So that said, how do we work toward DEI in ELT given the current policy landscape? One framework that I found really interesting and helpful has come from Hackman's work, 5 essential components for social justice education. So in line with the previous presentation, content mastery and factual information is a critical piece. tools for critical analysis, systems of oppression. And again, that really ties in with the previous presentation. Tools for action and social change, tools for personal reflection, and then in the center, multicultural group dynamics. Now, Hackman goes into some detail about what these things mean. But I think, I'd like to just maybe point out just a couple. So, we know a lot about content mastery. We know a lot about critical thinking. When it comes to critical thinking, I think the previous presentation really did a nice job about thinking of how to analyze oppression, the roles of perspective, positionality, and power, those possibilities. There were some really powerful examples in that presentation. And number 3, action skills, moving from cynicism to hope. And I know a lot of us are familiar here with the work of Frere. Self-reflection is also critical, but multicultural group dynamics, I think this is maybe a helpful place for a lot of us to start. It is the center of Hackman's framework. Awareness of social constructed identities in the classroom. So we might want to analyze how these dynamics are working at different levels of society. So in the classroom, sort of integrated community, and then kind of in the larger context. Here are pictures of some of our heroes. We've got Frere, we've got Ahmed, we've got Banks here. We always want to share their pictures because we adore them, of course. Frere's problem posing has really informed a lot of my pedagogy. I know the same is true for Anastasia. And he sees this as a method for creating critical consciousness. So the teacher's not the sole source of knowledge. Dialogue is encouraged. It reveals the way individual experiences differ. But most importantly, learning as a process of becoming. We are all unfinished. And in the interest of time, I won't reflect too much on Frere. I'll let Anastasia take it away with Banks.
Okay, so really quickly, we probably are all very familiar with the approaches to multicultural education with Banks 1999, but the ones that we really want to bring back into focus is a transformative approach and the social action approach. So the transformative approach looks at the changes of the structure of the curriculum. I know that Drs. Nero and Dr. Bryan also talked about this new space, and so we really want to bring in this idea of a new space, very transformative. They're changing, but also the social action also maybe looks at, I guess the way we look at it is it really literally takes apart and kind of, again, it deconstructs and creates a new area, focusing on social change through informed action on the part of the students. And so you're also looking at the, okay, children, thank you. Sorry, my kids, I'm sorry, it's like 5:30 here in Palestine, so it's dinner time. Anyway, all right, so social change, and this also hopefully goes on with the previous presentation of really getting the students involved, really trying to be more student-centered. The curriculum is fundamentally changed to reflect those social issues and actions. I think that also goes along with burn your lesson plan, right? Whatever is happening in the world, this is what your lesson plans are. And then moving very quickly to one of my favorites, Sarah Ahmed and the comfort couch. Turn off. All right, so really quickly, all right, so with Sarah Ahmed, she reflects on this comfort. She talks about it more in terms of heteronormativity, where she discusses this idea about certain bodies being able to fit in a certain chair. So if you're not, for example, like that ideal space, your body may not fit in that chair. Because the couches have already taken their shape, that space has already been taken. And so Ahmed also talks about this idea of a lot of times, especially in legislation, I attended this webinar where they talked about, we have certain areas we cannot move. We can't, in Florida, for example, we can't move the governor. We can't move the legislators as much as we want to move some of them, most of them in Florida. So how can we expand the couch, and who else can we advocate to let on? So teachers and students and parents. And so while a lot of spaces, at least in terms of some of our contexts, can't be changed, how can we expand it to put more voices there, to put more pushback, even though there are certain things that are kind of at the moment unmovable? Or though it seems, I mean, in the future, who knows? We can keep moving, we can keep trying, even though, as Jen mentioned earlier, we're all pretty much exhausted with the current landscape of policy. Okay, and our final, I think we have our final slides. let's see. And all right, so while we're doing that, sorry, I don't see the other slide.
Okay. There's a John Lewis quote, because how
There
do
we
you
go.
end social justice conversations without referencing the great John Lewis? Never be afraid to make some noise, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble, with the caveat that you need to stay safe in your spaces.
Be careful, know your context, but it's places like this where we can support each other and get ideas and continue to try to fight the good fight in many different ways. And again, that looks different in so many different ways in different contexts. So thank you so much, everybody. And we have our links to our LinkedIn. We have QR codes. So please join us and network us on LinkedIn to continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. This is again, and that was Anastasia, Khawaja, and Jennifer Killam. If you have any questions for them, you can put them in the chat or you can ask them directly at the end of the session. Up next, we have Rashida Young as she prepares. I just want to recap this particular session. I like the fact they talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are important conversations. If we can't, move the people or move what's a concrete fixture, then we need to reshape what's going on around it. So wonderful presentation. And so our next presenter, if she's ready, she can get started. Ms. Young.
Good morning, getting set up. Okay, can you all, yes, it says you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So, good morning, my name is Rashida Young. I'm going to be presenting with Dr. Christina Sanchez-Martin. I am super excited to presenting with Christina. She started out as my professor, quickly became my mentor, and I'm privileged to say as a friend. So we are presenting on positioning radical love through narrative inquiry to foster transformative language identities in the multilingual classroom.
Hi, everyone. We would also like to start with a land acknowledgement and recognition, since all of us are in different parts, especially for those of us in the US and North America. We think that it is important to have the space to acknowledge and recognize the lands where we are in, where we work, where we live, and so on. So I'm in Seattle and Rashida is in New Jersey, but no matter where we are, the platform, we're still in native land. So we want to encourage you to click on that link, natives-land.ca/ and check, learn a little bit more about the spaces where you're in as well. Because we use narrative theory and narrative inquiry to think about our pedagogy and our methodologies, we go about narrating every single aspect of our project. And so we're going to be talking about the story of how we came to this project, our different positionalities and how they came together for our collective goals, the story of who inspired us, the story of the methodology of this project, the stories of our pedagogies, which include 3 themes, and then the story of sharing, which is how we're gonna end.
A theme that continued to emerge in my scholarship is being a Black woman, a Black professor, and a Black mother. And through the scholarship, I was able to be affirmed that being a Black woman, a Black mother, and a Black professor in academia is hard. And a part of what I wanted to do as a student and also as a scholar is humanize the experience of being a Black woman, a Black mother, and a Black professor. And I became aware of this through writing my autoethnography in Christina's class. So what brought me to this work? In 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was shot for jogging, essentially for being Black and jogging in a white neighborhood. What brought me to this work is Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice playing with a toy gun and being murdered outside of where, being murdered outside. So he was robbed of his life by the police. And what brings me to this work is my son and my nephew. What continues to bring me to this work is in May of 2020, George Floyd was murdered for the world to see by police officers' knee being on his neck. And as a scholar, I could not escape the social terror of what it means and continues to mean to be a Black woman. And Derek Chauvin's eyes reminded me of this gentleman's eyes during a public execution where he was, the accusers were accused of raping a white woman and murdering someone, which was absolutely false. So in my autoethnography, I was able to explore what it means to be, again, a Black woman and a Black professor, but particular emphasis on this sign where my daughter wrote all lives. She wrote a curse word, right? But I was able to explore it and what her militancy taught me and what I learned. I continue to what brought me to this work is how my life felt in academia as a Black woman. And, you know, there's this belief that Black women are angry. And I'm like, spend a day in my shoes as a Black woman in academia and see what that tells you.
For me, reading Rashida's autoethnography and reading all the autoethnographies that people were writing in my graduate course invited me to also think about other aspects like the fact that I'm a Spanish speaker, born in Spain, in the US, and what it means to do that, especially in Pennsylvania, where I was at the moment, and also to think about the more transnational impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, especially during the pandemic when we were in isolation. And as different students in my classes were constructing those identities from transnational intersectional perspectives with different axes of power, define who they are, and so on. So we want to take a moment to read these questions so that you can think about those aspects as well. Like us, we were both reading each other's stories and we were reflecting constantly on our positionalities and how those inform our presence and your presence in the classroom and your pedagogies, right? According to all of those things that you see in the image. And so together, we identified collective goals, and those include to stand in solidarity and contribute to undo the epistemological racism that's prevalent in English language teaching, create authentic spaces for multilingual students, and to think about that there's more than one way of thinking, writing, and being in the classroom and in the world. And more specifically, in this project, we're describing how we created opportunities to develop and implement critical language pedagogies, especially those that contribute to decentering whiteness in the English language classroom.
The story of who inspired us, our literature review, we felt that it was important for us to pay particular respect to Geneva Smitherman and her work, particularly how she was able to shift the conversation and shift public and academic perspective towards the value of African-American vernacular English. And so we also felt that it was important through our project to highlight the idea of critical language awareness, which, as Smitherman explains, seeks to develop in students a critical consciousness about language, about power and society. And through our conversations and through our research, we agree that it is important to show the relationship between these three concepts, as Smitherman explains. We also wanted to emphasize the work of Dr. Carmen Kennard, Shurish Kanagaraja, Hood Feminism, Mickey Kendall, particularly with this idea that there is always more than one way of being, there's more than one way of thinking, continuing on the same vein with Dr. Motha, with English language teaching and what that means, and shifting the conversation from white English being the only standard by which we are enforcing and talking about in our classrooms. And we also borrowed from the work of Nelson Flores, with racial linguistics. We continue making the connection between hush harbors to creating safety in our classrooms, and why we need to create safety for our students. And if students don't feel safe, then it's harder for them to engage in authentic relationships. Borrowing from the work of Bell Hooks, where she emphasizes that the truest place for students to and teachers to engage is through an honest space and through an honest lens, which will help to create love, again, as being essential to our practice. And of course, with linguistic justice, Dr. Baker Bell, and using her text as a part of the discussion by which linguistic justice pedagogies models what critical anti-racist education can look like across communities. And we acknowledge that her text looks at the language myths and ideologies that have shaped language attitudes and policies in the US. Also, Dr. Goldie Muhammad in Cultivating Genius, which I love. And I actually took this screenshot from a presentation that she did at Columbia in February 22, where she looks at when we are putting together our lesson plans, or before we burn them, we are thinking about identity. We are thinking about the skills that we want our students to take away from the lessons, the intellect, advancing students' knowledge, and putting that knowledge into action, as well as criticality. And she has now extended this framework to now consider joy. And of course, similar to the just recent presentation, including Paulo Freire and the Pedagogy of the Press, by way of, again, student-teacher, teacher-student relationships and creating critical consciousness. And lastly, or not lastly, but in addition to the conscious parent, where you can switch out parent and put teacher, and suggest that the problem when we are engaging in critical practice is that we have to look at ourselves first if we want to empower our students.
Very quickly, for the sake of time, we use critical narrative inquiry because it allows us to ground ourselves in our realities and then to think about what we do outside of normative ways of understanding language, teaching, and so on. So we can move on to the next one. In terms of pedagogy, we identify three main aspects. The first one is revealing ourselves in the classroom, which we have talked about. We also have identified the importance of revealing complex stories of Englishes and complex racialized identities around language. And the most important one is creating spaces for transformation, or hush harbors, throughout all of this work.
The assignment that I like to talk about in particular is James Baldwin's If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is, which I paired with Gloria and Zaldawa's How to Tame a Wild Tongue. And just quickly, for the sake of time, that a part of the goal of the assignment was to increase students' awareness about the ways in which language is only and should only be used as a tool within specific contexts. And just quickly on that, when students look at language as a tool, they're more apt to engage, and we can disrupt this normative model linguistic approach to teaching. So for example, I tell students, if you want to change a light bulb, you are going to probably use your hand. You wouldn't use a hammer to smash it out, right? So the hammer is the tool, and we teach them when to use different Englishes, or I'm going to say that. Therefore, the assignment capitalizes on the interconnectedness of our political climate by introducing readings that center language as a tool.
One of my favorite examples for how to complicate stories of English and racialized identities is a poem by Shaida Patel from her book Migritude. Well, this is a portion of the poem, and I use it because it specifically speaks about the embodied nature of language, right? So language not just as something that's in our minds, but something that has very tangible and embodied effects on us. And the last theme that wraps everything up is how through our pedagogy, what we aim to do, and this speaks to what the previous presenters said, is the idea of creating spaces of transformation, which we defined around two ideas. The first one is the idea of the hash harbors by Dr. Carmen Quignard, that she defines as sites of resistance that function as hiding spaces for multiple literacies that were officially banned via institutional and state structure. So as teachers, we can choose to make space for these different kinds of literacies in the classroom. And also the idea of creating community belonging, which for us is a little bit different from inclusion, and humanizing the classroom by avoiding the spirit murdering of students, which we think sometimes happen when we focus too much on limiting standard ways of understanding language and identity. Rashida, do you want to go ahead and talk about it?
So what we would like for you to think about and consider are what grounds your teaching practice, what is the story of your teaching mission, considering current social inequalities, what aspects of your teaching maintain and or resist uncritical dominant language ideologies of whiteness, and lastly, in what ways will you show your students that you value their presence and their lived experiences? And in what ways do students feel alienated by course materials, or do they see themselves in them?
And that's it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rashida, for taking care of the slides.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you both for a wonderful presentation. I took away a few points. And really is that we need to look at ourselves before we can empower our students, and then understanding the local issues that can help us teach and empower our minority teachers so they can have a voice, and creating opportunities for transformation is critical. So thank you both. And I want to make sure I mention it's Miss Rashida Young and Christina Sanchez Martin. Thank you for joining us this morning.